Richard Mercer didn't even look at me when he said it. She knows this meeting isn't really about her. The conference room went quiet except for the soft rustle of legal papers. My mother sat beside him in black silk, one hand resting on Daniel's arm like they were posing for a magazine cover, instead of sitting through my grandmother's while reading. Then she smiled at the attorney and said casually, "You can skip the sentimental parts. My mother wasted enough money trying to fix mistakes." Her eyes slid toward me. "Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates." The mistake. The accident. The word they'd used my entire life. I sat alone at the far end of the polished table while Daniel, the heir, sat between them in the center like royalty. Even now, after the funeral, the arrangement felt deliberate. It always had. Separate birthday dinners. Separate vacations. Family portraits where I somehow ended up near the edge. By 16, I stopped asking why. Attorney Martin Hale adjusted his glasses and opened another folder. His expression had changed 3 times in the last 5 minutes, confused, uncomfortable, then tense. Across the table, my father leaned back confidently. He already believed he knew exactly how this would end. So did I. Daniel would inherit Mercer Holdings. My parents would keep the estate. And I'd probably receive some carefully calculated payout, designed to make them look generous. Martin cleared his throat. "There is one final clause from Mrs. Mercer that must be addressed personally." My mother sighed dramatically. "Of course there is." But Martin wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring directly at me. "Miss Mercer, did your grandmother ever speak to you privately about the company?" The question hit strangely hard. Before I could answer, my father snapped forward. "That's irrelevant." Martin hesitated, then slowly reached into a sealed document envelope. The room changed instantly. Even Daniel finally looked nervous. Martin opened the file carefully and said, "Before we continue, there is information your parents failed to disclose." My mother let out a short laugh, but it sounded forced this time. "She was never supposed to be here." I felt my stomach tighten. Martin looked at me again. "She wasn't an accident," he paused. "She is." Bang! My father slammed both hands onto the table, so hard the water glasses shook. "Do not finish that sentence." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And for the first time in my life, I realized my parents weren't embarrassed by me. They were afraid of me. The silence after my father's outburst felt heavier than the funeral had. Martin Hale slowly closed the file in front of him. "Given the circumstances," he said carefully, "the remainder of the reading will be postponed until legal counsel is present." My father stood immediately. Good. He sounded less angry now than desperate. Daniel stayed seated, staring at the table. I pushed my chair back quietly and walked out before anyone stopped me. My heels echoed down the marble hallway of the law office, while guests from the funeral reception moved through the lobby outside. I almost made it to the elevators. "Ava," my mother's voice. I stopped but didn't turn around. Elaine Mercer approached slowly, perfectly composed again now that nobody important was watching. "You should have stayed quiet in there." I laughed once under my breath. "About what? I don't even know what's happening." "You complicated things," she said flatly. "You always did." I finally faced her. For once there was no performance in her expression, no fake warmth for charity galas, no polished smile for photographers. Just irritation. "Daniel was planned," she continued. "Everything in our lives was on track, then you happened." The words should have hurt less by now. They didn't. She adjusted the sleeve of her black coat. "Do you know how humiliating it was explaining why we suddenly had another child?" I stared at her. "You sent me away when I was 13. You thrived at boarding school. You mean while Daniel stayed home?" Her jaw tightened. Images hit me all at once, being forced to enter charity events through staff hallways because family appearances mattered, sitting alone at birthdays while donors surrounded Daniel, my grandmother pulling me aside afterward with quiet apologies in her eyes. One memory surfaced clearer than the others. I was 14, crying in her kitchen after another fight with my father. Grandmother had held my face gently and whispered, "One day you'll understand why they fear you." At the time I thought she meant my temper. Now I wasn't so sure. Ava. I turned. Daniel stood near the hallway entrance, hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. Mum walked away immediately. Daniel waited until she disappeared before speaking. I should have said something years ago. About what? He swallowed hard. Dad used to fight with Grandma constantly, about ownership, shares, legal documents. He looked toward the conference room. Every time your name came up, he lost it. My chest tightened. This isn't about me being unwanted, I said quietly. Daniel didn't answer. Which was answer enough. A few minutes later my phone buzzed. Martin hailed. I stepped away and answered cautiously. Ava, he said in a low voice, I need you to stay in town tomorrow. Don't sign anything your father gives you. Don't agree to private meetings. What is going on? There was a pause. Then he said something that made my entire body go cold. Your grandmother spent 15 years preparing for this moment. The line disconnected. And standing alone in that hallway, I realized I had no idea who my grandmother had really been protecting me from. By the next evening, Mercer Hall looked less like a memorial and more like a corporate coronation. Crystal chandeliers glowed over rows of investors, board members, and politicians holding champagne glasses beneath giant black and white portraits of my grandmother. Waiters moved through the crowd while reporters lingered outside the gates. And at the center of it all stood my father. Confident again. Recovered. Daniel has been preparing for this company his entire life, Richard announced proudly to a cluster of executives. Mercer Holdings will remain exactly where it belongs. Daniel stood beside him in a tailored suit, but something about him had changed overnight. His smile looked forced now. I stayed near the back wall, ignored as usual. Until the ballroom doors opened. Martin Hale walked in carrying 3 thick legal binders. Conversations immediately began to die out around him. My father's expression hardened. What are you doing here? Martin didn't stop walking, fulfilling the terms of the trust. A ripple moved through the room. What trust? Someone asked quietly. Martin placed the binders onto a nearby table. Per Mrs. Elena Mercer's instructions, the estate clarification must continue immediately in the presence of Mercer Holdings board representatives. My mother stepped forward sharply. This is neither the time nor place. Legally, Martin replied, it is exactly both. People started gathering closer. Board members, family friends, investors, every person my parents had spent decades impressing. Martin opened the first binder. The Mercer estate, he said clearly, no longer belongs to Richard Mercer. The room exploded into whispers. What? That's impossible. Richard laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Martin, you're embarrassing yourself. Martin calmly slid several signed documents across the table. These transfers were executed 7 years ago. One board member grabbed the papers first. His face changed instantly. My father took a step forward. You incompetent idiot. The controlling shares, Martin continued over him, were transferred into a protected irrevocable trust connected to Ava Mercer. Silence. Complete silence. Daniel looked at me like he'd never seen me before. My mother actually lost color in her face. Then chaos started. Board members whispering. Phones appearing. Someone muttering about audits. Another about frozen accounts. I stood completely still, while the entire foundation of my parents' world started cracking open in front of everyone they respected. Then my father turned toward me. Of course he did. You manipulated her, he snapped loudly. You spent years poisoning my mother against this family because you wanted attention. Every nearby conversation stopped again. I opened my mouth, but Martin spoke first. Ava Mercer had no prior knowledge of this trust. Richard ignored him. She always resented Daniel. She always wanted what wasn't hers. Martin closed the binder carefully. That argument was already presented in court twice. My father froze. Martin looked directly at the board members. Richard Mercer attempted multiple private challenges against this trust over the last 6 years. All failed. A board member stared at Richard in disbelief. You hid this from us. My mother grabbed Martin's arm. Stop talking. That was when the ballroom doors opened again. 2 federal investigators walked inside. Badges visible. The music stopped. One of them scanned the room and said, Richard Mercer, we need to speak with you regarding several frozen corporate accounts. The ballroom erupted instantly. Conversations crashed into each other. Guests pulled out phones. Someone near the bar whispered, Federal investigators, loud enough for half the room to hear it. My father's face went pale for the first time in my life. This is a misunderstanding, he snapped. One investigator answered calmly, then you'll have the opportunity to clarify matters. Daniel stepped forward immediately. What accounts? Richard ignored him. Dad, Daniel said louder, what accounts? My mother rushed toward several board members, forcing nervous smiles onto her face. Please, everyone, let's not overreact. But nobody was listening to her anymore. The Mercer image, the perfect family, the untouchable company, the polished legacy, was collapsing in public. Martin touched my elbow lightly. Come with me. He guided me out of the ballroom and into a private office down the hall. The noise outside became muffled the moment the door shut. I turned toward him immediately. Tell me the truth. Martin exhaled slowly and removed another file from his briefcase. Your grandmother discovered financial discrepancies nearly 15 years ago, he said. At first she thought they were accounting mistakes. Then she found shell companies tied to your father. I stared at him. He'd been siphoning money out of Mercer Holdings for years. The room suddenly felt smaller. She wanted Daniel protected, Martin continued, but she was afraid Richard had too much influence over him. Your grandmother believed Daniel would inherit whatever values your father taught him. And me. Martin looked directly at me. You never wanted power, that's why she trusted you with it. He slid a document across the desk. An irrevocable trust. My name everywhere. Activation date, my 27th birthday. She planned this that long ago. She planned everything. I sat down slowly. Then Martin hesitated. There's one more thing you deserve to know. Something in his expression warned me before he even spoke. Your father learned years ago that you might not biologically be his. I felt all the air leave my lungs. He stayed, Martin said quietly, because your grandmother intended Mercer Holdings for the family bloodline. If he left Elaine, he risked losing access to the estate entirely. Suddenly every memory changed shape. The coldness, the resentment, the constant humiliation. Not shame, punishment. He called me the accident because he hated me, I whispered. Martin shook his head once. No, he called you the accident because he knew your existence gave you power over him. A knock slammed against the office door before I could respond. Daniel entered first, visibly shaken. He lied to all of us, he said hoarsely, my entire life. Behind him, my father stormed into the room. Cornered people, stop pretending. For the first time, Richard Mercer looked exactly like what he was. Not powerful. Terrified. He pointed directly at me with trembling anger. You took everything from me the moment you were born. The old version of me would have apologized automatically. Instead, I stood up slowly and looked him in the eye. No, I said, Grandma made sure you couldn't take it from me. The emergency board meeting started less than an hour later. Nobody bothered pretending this was still a memorial gathering. The champagne glasses were gone. The ballroom lights had been raised brighter. Board members sat rigidly around the long conference table, while attorneys filled the back wall with laptops and stacks of documents. My father sat at the far end now, alone. For the first time in my life, nobody rushed to stand beside him. Martin Hale stood at the center of the room and opened the final binder. "Before ownership transfers are formally recognized," he said, "the board deserves a complete explanation." No one interrupted him. Not even Richard. Martin laid out the truth piece by piece. Years ago, my parents had temporarily separated after one of Richard's affairs became public inside their social circle. During that separation, my mother became pregnant with me. Richard never fully believed I was his. But my grandmother, Elena Mercer, did. At the time, she rewrote portions of the family trust to ensure the youngest child would always remain protected within the Mercer inheritance structure. Richard stayed in the marriage because leaving meant risking access to the Mercer fortune. Then years later, Elena discovered the embezzlement. Secret shell companies, hidden transfers, corporate money quietly disappearing through accounts controlled by Richard. So she changed everything again. She transferred controlling ownership into an irrevocable trust under Ava Mercer's name, Martin explained, a structure specifically designed to prevent Richard Mercer from ever accessing the estate through manipulation, marriage, or succession. Silence filled the room. Not shocked silence anymore. Condemning silence. My mother finally broke first. "This wasn't supposed to happen," Elaine whispered. But nobody looked at her with sympathy. Several women from her charity foundation quietly stood up and left the room without speaking to her. Daniel sat motionless beside me, staring at the documents in front of him like his entire identity had just dissolved. "The heir," he muttered bitterly, "that was never about me." Richard suddenly slammed his fist against the table. "I built this company." "No," one board member replied coldly. "Elena Mercer built it, you exploited it." The investigators standing near the entrance exchanged quiet looks. Martin handed me a sealed envelope. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter from my grandmother. "Ava, they spent your life treating you like a mistake because they were terrified you mattered most. You were the only person in that house who never confused love with control. Do not let them make you smaller just because they are afraid of losing power." I had spent my entire childhood wondering what was wrong with me. Why I was easier to ignore. Why every room felt colder when I entered it. And suddenly, horrifyingly, the answer was simple. Nothing had been wrong with me at all. I looked down before anyone could see my eyes watering. Not humiliation this time. Relief. The board voted that same night to suspend Richard Mercer, pending full financial investigation. The motion passed unanimously. Daniel surprised everyone by agreeing to cooperate with federal investigators immediately. He didn't even look at our father while signing the documents. My mother approached me privately afterward near the empty ballroom entrance. "Ava, I did the best I could." I stared at her for a long moment, then finally said the thing I should have said years earlier. "You taught me my entire life that love had conditions." She had no response. Within weeks, everything collapsed around them. Charity boards quietly removed Elaine. Business partners distanced themselves from Richard. Friends who once filled our estate every holiday suddenly stopped answering calls. And me. I kept my tiny apartment. I sold the mansion. I funded the employee protection programs my grandmother had wanted for years and started scholarship funds under her name. Daniel and I slowly began rebuilding something honest for the first time in our lives, not golden child and accident, just two people raised inside the same lie. A month later, I walked alone through the empty Mercer estate one final time before handing over the keys. In the grand hallway, an old family portrait still hung on the wall. My parents and Daniel stood proudly in the center, and there I was near the edge, half-cropped beside the frame. For years that photo had felt accurate. Now it didn't. I looked at it one last time before turning away for good. My whole life they called me the accident. In the end, I was the one thing they could never control.